call this meeting to order. This is the regular meeting of the Northfield Public School Board. It's Monday, April 11th, 2011. Dr. Richardson, with your agenda changes.
Okay, you'll notice that in your table file you have some additional items for the consent grouping in terms of personnel items for appointments, increases, decreases, and changes in assignment. Also, I'd like to point you to item 7B 2D, the element number 4 that talks about retirement letters contingent upon approval of early retirement incentive plan. And again, the concept here will be based on your action on the early retirement incentive, then we will be providing you with a list of additional staff members who have requested early retirement. And again, only in this case that if for some reason the board was not to choose to implement the early retirement incentive, then we would want to maintain privacy for those individuals, because there would probably be some of them that would choose not to retire without that incentive.
Okay, there's no objection. We'll add those items to the agenda as we move forward. We have opportunity now for public comment, and this is a chance for members of the school district to address the board. We ask that you speak from the podium, that you state your name, the group you represent if you are here speaking on behalf of the group, and we ask that you limit your remarks to 3 minutes. I'd also like to remind the public that this is not an opportunity to engage in debate or dialogue with the board, but really a listening opportunity for the board. So is there anybody here who wishes to address the board? Anybody? I see nobody coming forward, so we'll move on to approval of the minutes. Board members, you have in your packet the minutes of the regular meeting held on March 14th, 2011. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Moved by Ellen. Second by Ann. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes of the regular meeting held on March 14th, 2011, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Thank you. On to announcements and recognitions. Dr. Richardson?
Okay, we have several announcements this evening. First of all, congratulations to the Northfield Platinum Knowledge Bowl team. They took first place in the regionals and are now moving on to the state competition in Knowledge Bowl. We also would like to congratulate our Raiders speech team. They are in second place at the March 12th Owatonna Speech Invitational. And then we'd also are very, very pleased to announce that the Northfield Public Schools is one of only 388 high school districts in the nation that is being honored by the College Board with a place on its AP Achievement List. Basically for 2 reasons. First of all, for opening AP classroom doors to a significantly broader pool of students, while maintaining or improving the percentages of students that are earning a score of 3 or higher. And as most of you know, the 3 is the score that's typically needed for a student to receive college credit for an AP exam. Between 2008 and 2010, our Northfield Public School program, the high school program, has increased the number of students participating in AP from 146 students up to 211, while still enabling more than 90% of our AP students to score grades of 3 or higher, which is, again, typically that score needed for college credit. This means that we can include the credential being named a 2010-11 AP Achievement District on our website and other materials that highlight recognitions, honors, and distinctions earned by the high school. So, again, great honor for the high school program. At their March 2011 board meeting, the Northfield Healthy Community Initiative Board also approved many grants to support 4 projects and activities designed to benefit Northfield youth. One of those applicants that was funded is the Northfield Area Learning Center's Student Activities Committee for the ALC Spring Fling Week. The Student Activities Committee is a new organization at the ALC, and for their first event, they're planning a Spring Fling Week modeled after the Spirit Week held at the high school. They plan to have different theme and activities and food each day, and hope that the Spring Fling will help foster school spirit, establish a sense of community among ALC students and faculty, and help students feel more engaged and connected to their school. And then finally, we'd like to congratulate the following students that participated in the 2011 Spring Chess Tournament hosted by South Central Service Cooperative, Mankato Community Education and Recreation. Primary Division, Peter Hillman, a student at Sibley Elementary, tied for 4th place. took second place in grade 1 competition. Jackson Hillman, a Northfield Middle School student, won first place in the middle school division as well as in the 6th grade competition. And Grace Hillman, also a Sibley student, participated in the tournament. So our one-man
That's right.
chess team champion family has done us proud in the area of chess.
It's a good activity.
Anybody else anything to add? Okay, on we go. Hey, you guys.
So I was just going to mention that both Greenvale and Sibley have had outstanding events since our last board meeting. They're eating the arts and the Sibley's,
Beyond words.
Beyond words.
Yeah. Anybody, anything else? Okay, thank you. Our first item for discussion is the community services budget for 2011 and 12. We have our community services director, Hannah Fuchco, here. I just want to remind the board, this is part of the process. We do these budget reports on each of our funds as we move forward. So in a matter of weeks here, we'll be prepared to approve all funds in our budget for 2011 and 12. And this is the first of those funded reports.
I'm assuming that the fact the microphone was up higher than the top of my head was merely an accident.
Joel was already checking it out to see if it was right for him.
Yeah. Okay, well, here we are. Thank you for the opportunity for us to present our community services proposed or preliminary budget for next year. This will be brought back to the board for approval. This is just a presentation tonight. But I do want to remind the board that it is the Advisory Council for Community Services that approves this budget for recommendation to the board. By statute, community services budgets must be recommended by advisory councils. So I always like to make that reminder. And it's not going forward.
Sure, clicker.
So just to kind of review and keep community education understanding out there. We have principles of community education that guide our program. Our focuses are on lifelong learning, maximizing community and school resources, maximizing community and school facilities, promoting collaboration and partnership, and citizen involvement. We have several programs and components kind of based on ages. We have adult learning area that includes adult lifelong learning or adult enrichment. Our adult basic education program provided through a consortium called Dakota County Adult Basic Education Consortium, or Dakota Prairie, I'm sorry, is a consortium that provides our program as well as Farmington and Randolph. We provide GED classes, adult basic education, literally teaching someone to read perhaps, a large ESL program with typically about 6 different levels of ESL. And we offer citizenship classes and work with the Workforce Center in terms of jobs preparation. Driver's education, we put in the adult category because that's one of those big steps into adulthood. Project Able is our collaboration with the Faribault School District, which provides programming and opportunities for adults with disabilities, and that really includes anyone 15 years and older. So we serve students whom we call students in transition, as well as adults with disabilities. Recreation, which we do in partnership with the City of Northfield. Our youth programs, Middle School Youth Center, the Ventures program, which is the school-age care program after school in every elementary school, as well as summer ventures. Youth Development Youth Service, we work in partnership with the high school Sarah Swan McDonald and her program, which promotes service learning among not only high school students and classrooms, but throughout the district. And so she and Jen Winterfeld work together as a team to promote that. Connected Kids Mentoring, we have almost 100 mentor matches right now, so that continues to be a strong program. In early childhood education, we have several programs again, and I really like to stress both in the youth area and in the early childhood area the importance of these programs as we support student success during the school day. So these might be programs that happen before children enter school. It might be identification programs to get children into programs before they enter kindergarten, or it might be an out-of-school time program which is intended, like Plus, to support our children out of school time. So early childhood programs, early childhood family education, early childhood screening, the hand-in-hand preschool, and bridges to kindergarten, which are both what we call school readiness programs. We are partner and fiscal agent for the Early Childhood Initiative Coalition, which is a community-wide venture effort to promote early learning and education and care. Early Ventures Child Care Center at Longfellow. Recreation again, across the ages, and then our community programs including facility use, which is the opportunity for people to access school buildings and school facilities for community use, as well as our supportive community relations in the district. The goal that we're focusing on here and what drives our budget work is one of our two goals in our site improvement plan. And that is to maintain the necessary revenues generation and expenditure reductions in order to provide financial stability and good stewardship of resources during the current difficult economic situation. As you remember from our site improvement plan, we're really focusing on that financial stability. Our other goal has to do with marketing, which has a direct relationship as well. We are excited to indicate here that through some very, very intentional efforts, through some hard work and willingness to change some ways we do things, perhaps tighten our belts in a lot of our program areas, and to make some difficult cuts that we've made in our program in the last couple of years, you can see a progression in terms of the health or lack thereof of our fund balance the last couple of years. So that first bar shows you a fund balance with a negative figure of just over 33,000, and that was 2 years ago, or in FY09. In FY10, we again had a negative balance of 29,000. If you recall, we talked about issues including the economic situation, but also some unexpected and quite considerable costs that we had for special needs in our child care program, and we are now catching up with that. And that's one of the reasons that both this year and next year look very positive, because we're on the upswing. We have our expenditure reductions have started to show us benefit. We see a little improvement with the economy, although some of our enrollments still look smaller than they used to, or lower than they used to, but we're certainly catching up on that levy that we needed to do in order to get things back in shape. So the proposed budget has a projection at the end of next year in FY12 of having a fund balance at around $88,000. Now there's some variables that will play into that, but if we were to come close to that, I think we would have achieved quite a lot in the last couple of years considering where we've come from. So the actual budget is at the end of this year, we anticipate a fund balance at the end of June 30th this year of $24,852. Our budget for next year has revenues of $1,851,000 and expenditures at $1,787,000. So we anticipate a revenue over expenditure next year of just under $64,000, which added to our anticipated fund balance for this year puts us at that new fund balance of $88,000. So that's the actual proposed budget. It's important to understand where the revenues in community service come because it's different than the rest of the school district. Community education, community services is not in Fund 1. It's not part of the general fund. It's part of Fund 4, which is separate and is there for the purposes of school districts running community ed programs. For the budget that we're proposing for next year, around 31% of those revenues come from either state aid and local levy or entitlements. We get payment from the state for school readiness as well as early childhood screenings. They're not levies or aid. Well, they're kind of an aid, but they're called an entitlement. 43% of our revenues come from participation fees. So, as I say, as many times as I can, we are essentially an entrepreneurial effort. And our participation, the fees the participants pay to enjoy and partake in their programs is really the lifeblood of what we do. We also write a lot of grants, as you can see from the consent agenda. We rely more and more on grants and are grateful for the local funders as well as state and federal funds that we've been able to access. And then other local sources, and that includes the $105,000 from the city to provide recreation, as well as some program chargebacks that go back and forth depending on who's enrolled in a program. But essentially, those are the big sources, and you can see that visually there. And just again to highlight those expenditures or those efforts in community education, in community services that we do that directly support either the operation of the district or support the K-12 efforts toward student success. And I'm not going to read through all of those, but it's all of those early childhood programs that feed into kindergarten entrance. We facilitate all the coordination of the facilities, community relations coordination, grants that support collaborative efforts with K-12, youth service learning, etc. And that amounts to $555,000. And that's about 31% of all of our expenditures. So the partnership between community services and the rest of the school district, we believe, is very important and works well. And as I said, there are variables. We never know what our enrollments are finally going to wind up to be. Fee collection sometimes is an issue, sometimes, and a variable I don't have up there that I neglected to include is grants. I mean, sometimes we've got a grant built in, and if we don't get it, then we'll have to adjust a budget. Or I do have it in there, excuse me. So anyway, those are things that could possibly change these numbers somewhat. And that's it, and we'll take any questions.
Thank you, Hannah. Anybody have any questions or comments? No.
What fund balance are you looking for as a goal?
We'd like to be between 5 and 10%. So my goal, my first phase goal for the last few years has been 100,000.
Yep.
And so we're getting pretty close there, but that wouldn't be 10% yet. But I think most programs sit in that area somewhere.
Anybody else? I really applaud you for the progress you've made towards that fund balance and your efforts to access grants. That's huge. And as you say, the consent grouping is full of those grant application reviews.
And I just don't want to neglect to say that a lot of people have worked very hard either generating new revenue, new fundraising efforts, or tightening their belts, and we're all pitching in, so it's paid off. Thank you.
Finally, I would like to thank you for all the support that Community Services provides the K-12 program, because it really is a partnership, and the services that come through the Community Services Department are really, really so important to the success of our students, so thank you for that. Great, thank you. Okay. Our first item for individual action is the program and budget recommendations for the general fund for fiscal year 2012. Dr. Richardson?
Okay. And I guess I would like to take just a minute to remind the board that the kind of presentation that Hannah just provided to you will be providing other presentations over the course of the next 2 months to give you information about all of our various funds, culminating then in June with the approval of all district funds based on that information. So again, Hannah was kind enough to lead off on that particular group of presentations, but we'll be following that up with other presentations that Stephanie will be doing for you over the next several months. Okay, let's talk about the first item in terms of program and budget recommendations for the general fund. I provided you with information in your packet concerning the budget recommendations that I provided to you at the March 14th board meeting, as well as a listing of all of the final set of reductions that would be in place if you approve the budget as it's being proposed in terms of the budget cuts. I think I would want to start in sharing this information tonight with a reminder that as a school district, and I think you heard Hannah talk about it tonight, we have really made, I think, over the last 6 or 7 years an effort to present to our community the position of being a responsible steward of resources. And we came from a position 6 or 7 years ago that was not so good in terms of that stewardship, and I think we have showed a continuation in each of the years since then of a real focus on trying to make sure that every taxpayer and every community member understands how important we see our role in terms of providing a balanced budget, in terms of positioning ourselves to maintain quality programming going forward. I think it's also important to remind people of the fact that as a district, we have gone through a very, very serious process with almost 180 people involved in that process. And given an opportunity for those individuals who represent, I believe, a true cross-section of our staff and community to really take a look at the core areas of our budget, really to think about what's important in those areas, and then to provide for us a set of program budget plans, which then could be rank ordered by another group of community members who represented a broad cross-section in terms of what we should restore if dollars were available to work that forward. I think it's also important for us to realize and be reminded at this point that beyond the work of the program review committees in terms of the budget program review committees and of the district budget review team, there's also a role for the superintendent and the board. And that role, again, is to identify if there are individual items or individual package elements that need to be called out because they would have significant negative impact on the school system if they weren't funded, and to think about how we can address those issues. So when I presented the information last time, what I had shared with you was that the proposal would be to completely restore the 97 and 98% packages for the elementary budget program, to restore the 97 and a portion of the 98% package for the secondary, and then to maintain the full 4% cut, or the 96% base package, for district services, for student services, and for the co-curricular, extracurricular programs. And again, I would reinforce that that's a continuing belief on my part that we should honor the recommendations coming from the budget teams and the district budget review process. I also would share at this time that I would continue to recommend to you that we would take a look at restoring 2 elements using our current district fund balance. One of those elements would be the elementary orchestra position, looking at the idea that elementary orchestra really is a 412, or begins the 412 program, that without a quality start to that program, it's going to be difficult to maintain secondary orchestra without that elementary component. And so that $56,000 restoration should be considered for your approval at this time. The second piece that I recommended on the 14th was the restoration of the 20 minutes of time of each of our current school nurses to bring their time in place out to the full student school day. And again, I would recommend that that be done at an amount of a little bit over $8,000 in terms of cost. So at this point, those are the recommendations that are in place for you. Again, you have the materials that share what the restored programming will look like and what cuts will still be made. I think, again, reinforcing the fact that the focus and emphasis has been on restoring as much of the elementary and secondary program as we could possibly do, and understanding that that meant that the district services, student services, and co-curricular programs needed to shoulder a larger percentage of the burden at this point in time. Two other things I want to share with you as we go forward, and then I want to talk more specifically about a component that we have not chosen to recommend for restoration, but a component we believe is very important for a school district, and that's our GATES, or our Gifted and Talented program. And our proposal to you as we go forward in terms of providing and hoping to maintain the highest possible program, even though we're not going to be able to maintain a separate GATES teacher based on the recommendations from the elementary team and the restoration program that was set forward. Before we look at that, though, I do want to share, because I know people have questions about what's happening at the state level. I'd like to say to you, I have a crystal ball, but it's either very foggy or not very, at this point, is extremely unclear. The situation that we know right now is we're still facing a $5 billion shortfall. We know that we have a House and Senate who are recommending budgets which make huge cuts in several areas, especially in health and human services, to the tune of about $1.6 billion, but keep elementary and secondary education about where they were last year. Although there are twists and turns in those particular proposals, because although there appears to be slight increases in the base formula in both packages also include elimination of the growth factors for special education, and either the freezing or the delinking of compensatory education that at least in terms of the House side, will actually result in a reduction of funding, even under the best case scenario coming forward from the House and Senate. On the flip side, we're seeing the governor's proposal, which is basically a freeze on K-12 education, except for all-day, everyday kindergarten for students who are on free and reduced lunch. And again, both of those programs basically are both perspectives from both the legislature and the governor's office trying to keep K-12 education as close to the same level as they were for the previous year. The biggest problem is we know that as this budget fight comes to an end, that there are going to be lots of folks saying, but what about our programs? Are we going to be happy with taking the $1.6 billion cut as Health and Human Services being asked to take, or major cuts in terms of transportation, or major cuts in terms of other state programming? And our belief is that as we move toward the end of this discussion, fight, whatever you want to call it, that it's very likely that there will be efforts to basically reduce K-12 education. And so we have moved forward and continue to present this proposal based on the worst-case scenario, which, if you remember earlier, we shared was a $500 reduction per pupil. We honestly do not know where that's going to be, but our belief is that that is the worst it could possibly be at this point in time. But I would also caution you to be very cautious of what you're seeing so far, because I don't think we've come anywhere close yet to seeing what the final resolution of this whole process is going to be. So we're moving forward again with a budget proposal with a $705,000 reduction that will put us in position to basically be in balance moving forward into the 2011-12 year and to maintain a 16% fund balance for the coming year. If in fact we see a significant reduction or more of a reduction than currently is on the table, we know that we're going to have to come back and make additional cuts in 2011-12 for the 12-13 year. If we do not, if in fact the budget proposals that are currently in place would actually hold, where the positioning of this reduction would land us would be being able to operate both in the 2011-12 and the 2012-13 year without making any additional cuts. So in the worst case scenario, we're looking at cuts again next year, depending on what the level of final cut is. If we're in a better position and in fact we actually get the best case scenario, we actually would be able to move forward another full year without needing to make any reduction. So I just wanted to make that very clear to people that that's kind of where we stand right now. The other piece that I know has been a major discussion point, and I know as board members you've gotten lots of information about, is the discussion about looking at the Gates program going forward for this coming year. And again, as you remember, the elementary budget team had proposed the elimination of the 1.0 FTE Gates program for 2011-12. And that program was not identified by for restoration in either of the packages that were presented by the elementary team. I also have not chosen at this point to recommend that restoration to you, but instead would like to share with you some thoughts about a proposed plan that we believe will give us a strong position to move forward with the Gates, but also put us in a position to understand that moving to this particular program gives us a much better long-term prognosis for maintaining a good quality Gates program going forward. Where if we would continue to try to restore Gates at this point in terms of 1.0 FTE, because it is outside the regular classroom realm in terms of regular classroom teachers, it would likely to continue to be a target each year going forward into the future. I've asked Heather Ryden to work with us tonight to talk to us a little bit about the proposal that's being presented. And I think the important thing to realize as Heather shares information with you tonight is that although the question may be, did this plan just come up out of nowhere in the last few weeks, the reality is it did not. Actually, the gifted program review team had been looking at this proposal throughout the course of this year as part of their process of reviewing the gifted program. Just like in the previous years, we had worked on the ELL program and on our compañeros program. They had thought that they might have some time to do some more gentle piloting and so on moving forward. But in discussion with the elementary principals, the belief was that this program was one that really deserved our review and consideration right now, because it would give us the ability to step forward and provide a high-quality replacement for the current gifted and talented program that we have. I guess I also want to reinforce to you before I ask Heather to step up is that the current program is a quality program. And nothing in the decision on the part of our elementary principals to not renew the current gifted program has anything to do with the quality of program, nor does it have to do with the high quality of the individual who is providing it. But I think as we take a look at what is the prognosis for having a quality program into the future as we're continually facing potential additional cuts, the ability to use flexible grouping and clustering as a strategy that will provide opportunities for gifted students to be supported every single day throughout the day is something that we believe has a great potential, as opposed to our current program that basically provides between 45 minutes and an hour a week for the students that are identified in the gifted program. So Heather, if you could step up and share with them some information about the proposal.
And improve the existing Quest program, or GATES program, the pull-out program for grades 3 through 5. And in addition to that, to find a way to provide more support for students and teachers at the classroom level. And one of our primary strategies that we found as we were conducting that research is the cluster model. And I know you have a packet in front of you and you've been able to look at that prior to this meeting. So I don't really plan to walk all the way through the packet unless you would like me to.
Why don't we share enough information so the audience and
Okay,
media
good.
have information
Mm-hmm.
on this if we can.
So anyway, back to our finding the cluster model. We have found that this is a viable option in a variety of places across the state and the country. And this is a way to provide gifted programming and gifted support for students in the regular classroom with or without another gifted program, such as a pull-out program like the one that we have. And I should add too, as we have been studying this model, it was always with the assumption that we would have the pull-out model along with it too, so they could be working in tandem with each other. And as Dr. Richardson said, as the budget reduction process has come into play here, we realized that this is something that we can do more rapidly than we had planned to do, but it's something that we can do to immediately try to help our gifted students in grades 3 through 5. So, drawing your attention to the packet then in front of you, the model is a method, again, for providing full-time gifted services without major budget implications. And in this model, students are very purposefully placed into each classroom based on their abilities and potential. And it's important to note that this is without going back to the practice of tracking. Gifted students are clustered in mixed ability classrooms with a teacher who knows how to differentiate and compact instruction, which is very important. So there are two major goals: to benefit all students at the grade level by increasing the opportunity for differentiation, and that can be done because the range of abilities in the classroom are reduced, and to provide gifted students with rigorous, faster-paced curriculum and instruction in a group of their intellectual peers. And again, a key piece here is that the teacher is trained to meet the needs of these particular students. So, moving on to the next heading, the grouping categories that are recommended in this model there are 5. Group 1 are the students who are identified as gifted. Group 2, the students who are identified as high-achieving students. Group 3, the students identified as average. Group 4, below average. And Group 5, far below average. And you can see in the chart that each classroom continues to have mixed abilities across the ability range, but the number of different categories of students are smaller than in a typical classroom. The range is not nearly as wide. And what is good about that is that teachers are able to hone in on the needs of each of those categories, the students that fall into those categories, more easily because they have fewer abilities to deal with in the classroom. It's really important to note that every classroom has either the gifted students or the high achieving students. And so there are always academic leaders in every classroom. Okay, so placing students is something that we'll have to work on. That's one of those things that we would have spent next year studying some of the pieces about how to identify and place students into classrooms, and we will be developing that sometime over the next few months. Placement has to be looked at after spring testing, so we make sure that we have the most current data to look at. District criteria will be determined, and I'm sure that our current GATES criteria will come into play with that. And ultimately, gifted students generally make up about 20% of the gifted cluster class. Usually, there is one gifted cluster class per grade level, but it depends on the numbers of students who need that service. So, selecting gifted cluster teachers, it means that gifted cluster teachers. I'm not going to say that again. It's very important because these teachers need to understand gifted students and understand their particular needs, and they have to have particular training on how to meet those needs. And that's something that we will be working on over the next few months as well. Again, this model offers a win-win educational approach that benefits all students, not just students who are in the gifted cluster. The gifted students demonstrate high achievement because they experience more consistent challenge in their learning, and special attention is paid to their social and emotional needs because of the specialized training that the teacher receives. And it's also just really important to note that one of the primary strategies of meeting the needs of gifted kids is letting them work together. And that's one of the strengths of the current Quest Pullout program, is that students have the time to be together with their intellectual peers where they can be themselves and be challenged by people who are at a similar level. And that is what happens as well in the gifted cluster classroom, only every day, throughout the day. The research also suggests that all students in all of the ranges thrive when they're placed in heterogeneous classes according to the guidelines of the model, and learning opportunities are open to all students, and all students engage in flexible grouping opportunities. And when you go into a gifted classroom, you don't necessarily see, oh, this is the gifted classroom. You see kids working together across the gamut all the time. But you also do have, again, that opportunity for gifted kids to work together. And then finally, cluster grouping offers new opportunities and possibilities to meet the needs of ELL students. There are ELL students who are gifted and have great potential, but they have a language barrier that prevents them from participating in the current form of our program at times. And they are more likely to receive advanced instruction and extended opportunities too, and consequently make faster progress in terms of fluency and academic achievement. The impact on teachers is that, again, going back to the range of abilities in the classroom, teachers can be more effective in their teaching because they're teaching in classes with smaller ranges of learning levels. The system provides opportunities for teachers to more readily respond to the needs of all their students, to challenge the gifted students in mixed ability classes, to engage in practices that affect all learners positively, and even for those students who are not identified as gifted. Many of the strategies that you use for gifted students can be used for all students at various times depending on what their needs are. So I think to sum this up, the major benefits again are gifted students are challenged on a full-time basis with little additional cost. Grouping gifted students together provides that social and emotional and academic benefit to them. There are leadership opportunities and high expectations for all students, and that narrowed range of abilities allows for more focused instruction within all the classrooms at the entire grade level. And again, teachers learn strategies for gifted learners that they can use with everybody. And essential to this idea is the idea of ongoing assessment, both formative and summative assessment, to foster continuous progress for students. There are some challenges. For those people who have experience with teaching gifted students, they're wonderful, and teaching gifted students is also very demanding. And teachers in gifted cluster classrooms will constantly face the challenge of making sure that they're meeting their needs, that they're compacting and differentiating instruction all the time for these students. And another challenge is I want to remind you that all teachers will have high ability kids in their classrooms or gifted students, but they will also have students who exhibit far below average achievement. And so for some of those teachers, they may have a disproportionate number of IEP meetings and things of that nature, and that's just something that we have to keep in mind. There also may be parental pressure to place children who have not been identified into the gifted cluster classroom, and that's something that we will just have to continue to face. And it also may be a challenge to place students who enroll during the school year and also maintain the balance that we're looking for across the grade level. So as Chris mentioned, we plan to pilot this idea next school year instead of the following school year. And we have identified a few of the tasks that need to be completed. As we pilot this program, we will constantly be monitoring how we're doing and where we need to make changes. And we also will be looking at how to expand the program to the primary grades if we can, and not next year, but the following year or in years after. So our major tasks to be completed would be to start to communicate implementation information with staff and parents, and to determine identification and classroom placement procedures that I mentioned before. We need to identify teachers at grades 3 through 5 who will be teaching in which classroom, who will take the, if you look on the front page, the group A, class A, or B or C. We need to provide professional development for all gifted cluster teachers. And we will also need to prepare some kind of a communication plan to inform parents, guardians of their child's placement in the program and what that means. And we also want to spend some time looking for supplemental resources that will be helpful to the teacher in the classroom who is trying to meet the needs of these students who have such high needs in terms of the kinds of things they need to be doing, particularly in reading and math. And as I said, we'll want to have a plan to monitor how this program is working over time. And we also ultimately want to be able to provide professional development in differentiation and gifted strategies for all teachers at the elementary level and truly in the whole district. But it's important for our gifted cluster teachers to have specialized training, but we also want every teacher to have the opportunity to learn about these strategies. And the gifted cluster teacher next year may be there for 3 years, and then we'll move teachers around. I think it's important for over time for teachers to have different opportunities to work with different classrooms. So, and please do make sure that you take a look at the additional information provided there too in the form of a FAQ, which I think helps to further clarify some of these points too. So I would love to answer any questions if I have the answers to them.
I guess I would reinforce two pieces that Heather's talked about. I think number one is we laid out the work that had been done by the gifted program review team to the elementary principals. I think as they looked at this, given what they saw as the need to make the reduction in terms of the Gates program teacher, I think there is a strong commitment on the part of the three principals, and I have them here so they can share that commitment if you feel that that would be appropriate. Stand up, cheer, wave, get on the salute, whatever. But I think that the key piece is that they are looking at this saying, this fits so well with, I think, what we've been looking at in terms of flexible grouping in this last year. And really takes it to, I think, a whole new level in terms of thinking about how do we use flexible grouping in the clustering strategy so that we're supporting our gifted students, also supporting all of our other students in terms of providing instruction at their level. I think they also saw this as kind of a good first step is to provide the cluster classroom at each grade level in each building. But I think are very supportive of the idea that the kinds of training and skills that we build for the cluster teachers, we want to expand to the rest of the staff, because the good skills that are being trained in there are going to be skills that are going to end up being beneficial for every teacher. And I think finally, actually Dave sent me this information on Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. Did I butcher that, Dave?
No.
All right. Or ZPD. Basically, what that talks about is research that says one of the key things that is really provides support for gifted students is the ability to be together on a regular basis so that they're interacting with each other at the level that they are currently functioning, and they're asking questions and trying to dig out answers at that level. And again, while we've been able, I think, to do a very good job with Quest for that hour a week, the rest of the time we were sending those students back into the classroom where, while there was some flexible grouping occurring, for the most part they were operating and functioning with all the other students and a broad range of ability levels. And this program provides the ability for us to bring all the students at the grade level together into one section so that they are supported at a much higher level. And as Heather said, and I think is a key thing to repeat, all day, every day. And so it is a different strategy, it's a different approach going forward in terms of supporting our gifted students, but I think one that we feel has a lot of promise, and one which I think the gifted program review team really felt was a direction that they wanted to see us head. I also would say, as Heather described earlier, this is going to move much faster than we had initially anticipated. It's going to mean some significant extra work for Heather and Amy as they're looking at moving forward through the remainder of this year and into the summer. But I think it is an option that I think provides us more than just a window dressing approach, because this isn't window dressing. This is a focused program that I think really will support our gifted students at each grade level in grades 3 through 5. And again, will give us the ability to provide this program without having a pull-out strategy that we currently have and an additional staff member that's currently providing that particular program.
Well, and I think it's worth, you said this very well in the beginning, Dr. Richardson, that nobody wants this program cut. And yet this is a way to try to meet the needs of gifted students. And I think one of the things that's so great about this program is it can stand alone, but it can work alongside any kind of gifted program. So if we find ourselves in the future in better budget times, this program can stay and we can add that other piece, that other layer that we're losing now and we've lost over the last few years. So I think it's a step in the right direction, and hopefully we will get to that other place some other time in the future.
Thank you. This was an excellent handout. I found the FAQs and this distinction between a bright child and gifted child very useful.
Good.
Anybody have questions?
Excellent. Excuse me. First of all, I want to thank you for all the pulling this together and really presenting it tonight. Two things that that we talked about, and what I appreciate is that this plan really does demonstrate that we have a strong commitment to continue to serve Gates children. And what you just alluded to, that is maintain the Gates structure so that we have the ability to expand this program if funding should allow in the future. And what Dr. Richardson had alluded to as well is the concern that our parents have, and that they've been very involved with watching the budget reduction process. And I know you have so many other details to work out, but has there been any specific discussion in terms of how and when it will be communicated to parents of current Gates students?
No, there hasn't been anything specific, but we know sometime within the next month or so, we'll spend some time going around to speak to staff members to do something similar to this, to kind of explain the changes in the program, and then we'll develop some communication for parents as well.
Thank you.
Because that communication will occur before we have really the data to determine potential placement of students.
Noel?
Thank you for your presentation. It's very helpful and very informative for me. I think I can say from Northfield reference that the district has always gravitated to programs where all of the teachers have an opportunity to learn new skills and have opportunities for teaching. And that having said that, then I think it's an opportunity where all students in the classroom can also raise the level of learning opportunity and skills. We'd like to thank you.
Well, and thank you for that comment. And I should point out that our teachers already are amazing, and you know that, and they work so hard to differentiate in the classroom. And so I wouldn't ever want to belittle that process for them. They are so amazing, and they do amazing feats every day in the classroom. And yet, like you said, it will be very helpful to have additional training with these strategies as well.
John?
Yeah, I guess what I understood you to say is that this was intended as designed as a pilot program and intended to supplement a Gates program. So if we haven't tried it yet, why do we believe that it should adequately replace the Gates program?
Well, I don't think anything replaces the Gates program per se, but I think this is our best response to not having a Gates program and to provide a comprehensive program for our students who are gifted. And no, we don't have the experience with it yet, but we do have quite a bit of information about this being an effective model in other places, and this is sort of where the current best practice is in terms of gifted education. So again, on its own, as a standalone program, or as something that works in tandem with another piece. So this is our response for this time, to try to do our best to meet the needs for these kids.
I think we have maybe building principals who'd like to share some thoughts too, because they've been chewing on this too as we've laid it out for them.
Yeah, I would just add that the other piece that we've implemented this year that we hadn't in the past is flexible grouping, and we've seen a tremendous amount of success with flexible grouping. And we're doing it at Sibley at every level now. And for students of like abilities to be together, they have a tremendous opportunity to learn. And as Dr. Richardson pointed out from the information he received from Dave, there is a ratcheting up that occurs when students are with one another. And I think the flexible grouping that we've done has been somewhat of a training ground for something like this. So that has been beneficial as well.
Dan?
I just want to add as well that Heather, and I know you know this really well, we have a number of teachers who are trained in cluster classroom activities. And it is a GATES program. It's a Gifted and Talented Enrichment Services program. And that whole sense of having the training and differentiation brings everybody up. So we're really lucky that you were working hard on this pilot as you're going into
I'm really
this,
glad we
because
were.
Timing is everything sometimes.
It's, and some of these pieces have been in place before in Northfield, and we have teachers trained in this. And the other thing I just wanted to point out is this will make for some really interesting PLC work.
Yes, it will.
And those go together. So I see this as a win-win. I think that the Gates program will be different, but will still be really good, and that we will be doing all we can to meet the needs of our students. And thanks for your work.
I think you bring up a good point too about that we do have some resident experts here in this district, and we will certainly be tapping into them in terms of our training and for advice, things of that nature too. So thanks for that point, Dan.
I have two questions. One was to get a sense of how this would affect children that aren't in the Gates program, and then the second question is probably more for Dr. Richardson, and it has to do with if this is scaled based on funding. If we're cutting this 1.0 FTE, so this is what we have, and if we end up with additional money, would we be having something that's more than this or less than, is there a scaling? So the first one though is just how would, if you have a child that's not in the Gates program, how is this model going to impact them? Will they see a difference?
Well, I think what is the most helpful thing is, again, that the range of abilities in the classroom is narrowed. So we don't have the wide gamut of student needs in the classroom where our amazing teachers are working so hard to differentiate instruction and meet the needs of all of those students. There are some fewer needs. And so that's what the research shows, is that there's just more attention paid to each individual student, and every student receives differentiated instruction. The other piece is that because there are because the gifted students are not in the other classrooms, it allows for the high achievers to take on a role of new academic leadership. And then you also find that other students kind of rise to the occasion, and you end up having more students who are quote unquote high achievers, because there's just a different a tone in the classroom.
I think coming to your question, I think initially for us, again, we're operating with what we anticipate this budget to be going forward. Again, with unfortunately the maximum level of cut. Our sense is if there are additional dollars that become available, I think at that point then we're going to have to take a look at all of the needs across the system to determine where those dollars would go first. For example, as you know, as part of this reduction, we've reduced the contingency fund that was in place in the district services budget. The contingency fund was used by all 5 of our buildings to make up for situations where we had really very different kinds of ratios of kids, where we might have had a class that was too big for one class, but might have been initially too small for 2 classes, etc. And so I think potentially before we would look at adding additional pieces to the Gates program, and I guess I do want to reinforce what Ann is saying. We are not eliminating a Gates program for kids. We are changing the delivery model for that program right now and moving away from a pull-out program strategy to a cluster and pull-in model in terms of that tied to the flexible grouping. I think what we will have to decide at the point, if there are enough additional dollars available, we would need to decide if once again providing some kind of a pull-out piece would be beneficial. But I think we'd also have to look at the fact that, again, in all of our other areas, we took a full 4% cut. And we're going to have to determine if there's some of the pieces within those other budget areas that would need to be restored before we added additional funding back into the Gates program.
So just a point of clarification. So we eventually will be looking at the cuts here in the 1.0 FTE Gates, assuming that's the cut. This could be still implemented as it is.
Yes. Yes, because the strategy here is that the source of funding to provide this is actually built into the curriculum and staff development budget. Because if you remember, gifted and talented was the area that we were focusing on this year. So they actually have funds within their budget to cover resources and the funds within their budget to cover staff development. And also, because this is the focus, this will be something that Heather and Amy will be kind of leading the charge moving forward. I think what's important too is that we have commitment at this point from our 3 elementary principals to work on the pieces that they know they're going to have to do. The identification process for the kids, to make sure that we have everybody identified. We're working with Heather and Amy in terms of determining which teachers will be responsible to be the gifted cluster teacher, which teachers will be in the other areas, and then working obviously with parents to share that information with them and to work through any questions that people might have. So this is something that's going to have to be a joint effort between curriculum and instruction and our 3 elementary principals. And my sense right now is that there is solid support for putting this piece together. And I think solid support because I think all 3 principals have seen the impact of flexible grouping on their students and what that's done in terms of changing the way kids are able to interact and the way kids are able to learn when a group is focused at their instructional level. And so I think there's a real desire to bring this together. And it really takes us a long ways down the road to taking kind of the vast part of the professional learning process, which is really creating a systematic intervention strategy, which says that we systematically intervene and support kids wherever they are. And this provides that additional piece for us.
John, did you know?
Yeah, I've got a question for Scott on this. My recollection is that we get some federal funding that pays for the
State funding.
Okay.
There's a small amount of state funding, not enough to even fund the existing staff member that we currently have. And again, the resources for that will be, at this point, will be shared across the buildings in terms of providing the support. But there was never enough money in the budget to even fund the existing teacher.
By making this change, though, we don't lose that funding?
No. No, because if you look at the 340 plus districts in the state, when you really look at districts that are able to create separate GT teachers, that's a fairly small number of districts across the state. Many more districts are looking at trying to do pieces that are similar to what we're doing with looking at a different strategy for supporting gifted students.
Doesn't the funding come through as support for GATES type activities?
Exactly, as opposed to staff member. So yeah, it has a different feel to it. It's unlike Title I, where basically our Title I program actually buys title staff, and if Title I money goes down, the number of staff members we have available has to go down in direct proportion. It works differently than that because it's state funding only.
Let's shift gears for a minute here. I'm very excited that this provides an opportunity to meet the needs of the gifted ELL learners. But what I'm wondering is are the compañeros teachers going to be trained in this cluster grouping, or are there going to be other opportunities for some of those students, maybe through the flexible grouping to work with the contemporary program students?
That's a good question.
I was going to say, I think Scott and I had this discussion today, if you want to use your lifeline. But feel free to share whatever you'd like to share
I'll start and then I'll use my lifeline.
Okay.
You ready? Your question was about ELL students and meeting their needs and compañeros. And I think in terms of the ELL student piece, I would say we haven't worked out any specific details in terms of how that would take shape in the cluster. In terms of compañeros, as it says in your document, we are piloting this in the contemporary program for obvious reasons, because there are so many difficulties wrapped up in how to implement this in compañeros as well. But that was part of our conversation that we were beginning to have and planning to have over time. But ultimately, yes, we absolutely want to have all compañeros teachers trained in these strategies as well, because over time they will have self-contained classrooms, and they will need to be able to use the same strategies used throughout the rest of the elementary program. So, yes.
Okay, so that's sort of down the road as this pilot develops.
Well, and it depends on what we can provide. We know for the gifted cluster teachers, we absolutely have to provide training this summer and over the course of next school year. But if it is possible to provide some training and gifted strategies for all teachers next year, we will try to do that as soon as next year. But it depends on where our needs are and how the staff development calendar sort of shakes out.
Sure. Anybody else?
I was going to say...
Should I use my lifeline?
Scott, I think, can share kind of one other piece that I think we're seeing with this.
Well, and if I missed that, let me know. But I might have another piece too. I tend to,
you don't remember our discussion? No,
I do.
Okay.
I think the other piece to remember is that our Compañeros program is a choice program, and families choose, to go in that direction. And it is also somewhat of an enrichment program in that it offers a second language opportunity. The other piece is that when I'm running numbers, which, when we talked about this initially a while back, I looked at MAP numbers and MCA numbers, and we're looking at, maybe 6 or 8 students per grade level, across a group of 100 students who are in that 98th or 99th percentile. And it may lead us down the road of having a conversation with a family and just, exploring the 2 different options, whether it be compañeros or whether it be, being a part of that cluster. So there are things that we just don't know yet. However, we will treat these situations on a case-by-case basis and make some decisions with family members too.
Thank you. Anybody else, anything? Okay. Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good job.
So here we are. The superintendent's recommendation is to approve these recommended reductions and restorations to the 2011-12 general fund budget, as well as funding from the district's fund balance, to reinstate a 1 FTE elementary orchestra teacher and 20 minutes of additional time each day for each building nurse. And I'd ask for a motion in support of that recommendation.
So moved.
Moved by Julie. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Noel. Any further discussion? Julie.
I just wanted to share briefly two things about 2 of the budget reduction areas. The first would be restoring of the office specialist for 30 minutes, and I just wanted to point out that that isn't just restoring 30 minutes for that person to do paperwork or things like that. That is about having someone in each of the elementary school buildings at the end of the day to be able to handle any bus situations or lost kids or anything like that. So just wanted to clarify that. And then the second area was the 0.4 reduction of the high school security monitor. And I understand that that position will actually be streamlined in order to continue to focus on building safety. So that in both areas where we're making some budget adjustments, the kids' safety is really primary focus in those areas.
Good clarification. Any other comments? John?
I just want to make sure I'm clear on what we're talking about now. Is it the recommendation here of these?
No, that's item
No,
number 3.
that's item number 3.
This is what we're doing.
So it's this piece right there with that title. So what it is a $705,000 reduction, which includes the elements that were identified, which means basically the full 2% restoration for the elementary in terms of moving that from 96 back to 98%. A 1.7% restoration for the secondary out of the 2% to bring them back up, and then a full 4% cut for district services, for student services, and for co-curricular activities. So a total of $705,000. And then aside from that, a request to basically restore the 1.0 orchestra teacher and the 20 minutes of nurse time using our existing school district fund balance. So that's the recommendation.
Thank you. Anybody else, any questions? Is that clear now, John? Comfortable moving ahead?
No, but all right, and so then if we're supporting this motion, then we are also making all the other cuts, or the other cuts come later?
If you find this,
I find this, I've got it.
Okay?
okay, then the second page lists the things that are going to be, the cuts that are going to be made.
Well,
And later in the agenda, then we'll move on to the retirement incentive, which, if we approve that, may provide some additional FTE, which our building principals will decide what to do.
John, if you're looking for the whole list of items, the first 2 pages are the recommendation, front and back, and then the next 2 pages say superintendent's recommendation to the board, summary of budget reductions with all recommended restorations. And there's a list, elementary, secondary, district services, student services, and so on, that show you exactly what gets cut or eliminated in each area. Do you see that piece? So that's what you're voting on, would be that package of reductions and restorations.
Ready to go? Do I have a motion?
Yes,
and a second. Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. On to the early retirement incentive plan. Dr. Richardson, Ms. Mann.
I'll go ahead and do this one. So, basically, at our March 14th meeting, Matt and Stephanie presented to you information about a proposal to consider creating a $15,000 retirement incentive per employee if 10 or more teaching staff members agreed to retire at the conclusion of the 2010-11 year. And again, our thought at that particular time was that by doing that, we would generate a significant amount of savings that would be available beginning in the 2011-12 school year, and that savings would continue on at a lower level through the next 10 years. With the idea that we actually would then create additional dollars which then could be used to provide and support the district budget. When we completed the offer time frame, which was on April the 4th, we ended up with 9 individuals who had submitted their letters to the district out of 10. But we also identified that out of those 9, we had 7 that were full-time and 2 that were part-time. And when we did the original calculation of approximately $244,000 savings for the 11-12 year, we were making that calculation based on 10 full-time employees. So what we're looking at right now is that with the 9 people involved in terms of full and part-time teachers, we calculated the savings to the general fund of approximately $209,000 for the 2011-12 year. I think as the 3 of us have reviewed this, we believe strongly that a $209,000 savings at this time is still a very, very viable savings to the district, and one that could have a significant positive impact for our elementary and secondary programming, because it would provide the equivalent terms of funding of about 3.71 FTE teachers that could be placed back into the program. What we are proposing to you is your consideration on accepting the retirements of the 9 full and part-time teachers in terms of using the early retirement incentive. That would then provide us with 3.71 FTE of teachers, and that we would propose that savings, because it was totally generated from salaries and benefits of teaching staff, that savings be transferred back to the elementary and secondary program budgets based on the percentage of student enrollment at each level. So that would mean that we would be able to provide funding for 1.60 FTE teachers back to the elementary budget team leaders and 2.11 FTE teachers that would be provided back to the secondary budget team leaders. And they would be able to use those dollars to impact the budget cuts that have already been approved by the board for the 2011-12 year, and in many cases to restore a number of the cuts that are being proposed. It is our belief that providing that 3.71 FTE directly affects elementary and secondary programs, and in doing so, that would provide us the greatest flexibility in addressing the needs of elementary and secondary buildings. The other thing I think that's important to realize, again, remembering that we have reduced the contingency fund by approximately 1.0 FTE, that it is very likely that a portion of this 3.71 FTE might be used in the same way that previously elementary and secondary buildings had requested funding from the contingency fund. The reality is that contingency fund is now smaller. It really is just a little bit less than 2 full FTE, and therefore having that additional dollars back in place at elementary and secondary, we believe, gives them much greater flexibility for addressing their needs at each level. So that's our proposal at this time, is that we would accept 9 instead of 10, that we would accept that $209,000 in savings, and then that we would distribute that savings in FTE back out to elementary and secondary so that they could use it to address budget cuts or contingency needs at each level.
Any questions for Paul? So if I'm understanding it correctly, then this wouldn't be used in any way to restore the fund balance of the cuts we just made. Part of the recommendation was to fund the nurses and the orchestra program from the fund balance.
My recommendation is to keep those things totally separate. And I guess the reason is, if you remember when we talked through this process initially, I said to you that these are two things going down parallel tracks. That the recommendation I made to you on the budget reductions and the recommendation I made in terms of the fund balance reduction to cover those two pieces, I feel needs to be covered and approved as you've done tonight. I guess I would like to recommend that you address the savings that we've achieved with this particular proposal to go back to the building level so that buildings can make decisions as to what are their greatest needs right now in terms of supporting their teaching staff, as opposed to trying to, first of all, take anything out. And the other piece is it would not be at all appropriate, I don't believe, to restore anything but a teacher position anyway. So it would not even be appropriate to consider those dollars to restore nursing time, etc. I really believe at this point, though, you do those two pieces separately, and I guess I believe that with our current fund balance, given where I think we may see things land, I think we will still maintain a very adequate fund balance that carries forward at 16% or higher.
Anybody else have any questions? John?
Can you explain again where the money comes from for the retirement incentive as opposed to where the money
For the actual
goes
payout,
for the,
yes. The actual payout comes from, we have in the existing budget right now a designated section within the general fund which has been set aside to fund the retirement and severance benefits for teachers. And we've been building that fund balance over the past several years by putting dollars into that designated fund. And so our recommendation will be that this as basically a part of that early retirement incentive would be eligible to be taken from that funding source. And so that would be where the $15,000 times, again, 7 individuals and then a portion of 15,000 times the other 2, that's where that money will be drawn, as opposed to the unrestricted general fund budget, which would be maintained whole.
And in terms of these 3.71 FTEs, this is not in addition to replacing the 9 people who are leaving, right? I mean, this is 9 people would be leaving, and in place of that, we'd have 3.71 positions to fill.
No, basically in terms of where you are now, with the new teachers coming back in, you have 3.71 FTE on top of what it would cost to hire the new positions back for as many of those teachers as the principals believe need to come back. So there's a differential between what the new teacher costs versus what the old teacher bringing back gives you actually money enough to hire that new teacher plus have 3.71 additional FTE available. Now, what we believe is, there may be some areas where we will not be actually replacing an individual. In one case, we know that it's likely that our Title I funding will go down. And if there's a teacher in terms of Title I that maybe is part of the retirement group, we might not restore that particular position because the Title I funding for that teacher is not going to be there in another year. But we have the ability with this, as I understand it, Matt and Stephanie, is to basically hire back individuals at an average of step 3 and still have the differential of 3.71 that would be in place to support us.
Anybody else, any questions? Ready to vote on this? I ask for a motion to approve the early retirement incentive plan and the superintendent's recommendation to distribute the 3.71 FTE teacher savings to the elementary and secondary budget team leaders for their use in hiring needed teaching staff for the 2011-12 school year. So, moved by Ellen, is there a second? Second. Give it to all.
This one is much more fun, isn't it?
Yeah. Any
Yeah.
further discussion? Julie?
I just want to make one comment that I'm very supportive of restoring the 3.71 FTE teachers, because if you look, unfortunately, this is not the first budget cuts that this district has done, and since 2004, we've cut 5 teachers at the elementary school and 7 teachers at both the high school and middle school. So this is really important.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, now to the really complicated one. The resolution discontinuing and reducing educational programs and positions. And we have middle school principal Jeff Peshta and high school principal Joel Lear here to explain that to us.
And as they're coming up, what I would share with the board is that this particular portion of the presentation tonight is very similar to what we have seen in previous years, where we have identified multiple portions of FTE to be reduced at the secondary level. Obviously, we have some additions, one of which you will need to amend this particular resolution, because with your approval of item 1 in the budget tonight, you'll be striking the 1.0 elementary orchestra off of this resolution list. And so you'll need to be prepared to do that as you move forward. And what I've asked Joel and Jeff to do for us this evening is to talk us through how they've come to the position of being able to talk about these potential resolutions and what they will be doing over the course of the next week or so to finalize to where they will be coming back to you on the 25th to give you the final recommendations for the reductions that are going to occur. Also understand that these had to be created at a time when the reductions that were identified in place were still there. And there was no indication that there would be any restoration of the early retirement incentive. So they have to build those at a point in time based on the preliminary student data. And so now what they're going to be doing, I'm sure, is not only talking to you about how they got here, but also about how this will translate as they move forward toward the final listing of potential staff reductions that will be presented on the 25th.
Right. To paraphrase what you just said about your actions tonight, made our jobs a lot easier as we move forward with the recommendation for the early retirement piece, because obviously that simplifies our job, because as we went into the budget reduction process with our secondary team, essentially coming out of that process, we move into the staffing and the staffing and scheduling model that we always do this time of year, only with a number given to us by our human resources department, and then subtracting obviously the budget reductions from that number, and before we even start. So the fact that we're going to have a restoration of a significant amount of that initial cut is going to make this a lot easier process than we expected coming out of those secondary budget reduction processes. So I would just say that, like, again, as Dr. Richardson mentioned, this is a very similar process to what we go through each year as a secondary pair of buildings. And I'll speak to the high school and let Jeff speak for his. We are a student-driven schedule. So our staffing within departments fluctuates at the requests of students as they select classes, as they determine what their needs are for the classes that they would like to choose for the coming year. Then our staffing for those departments fluctuates. And obviously there are places where that staffing remains more constant than others. If you think of social studies, science, math, English, those areas where state and local requirements are significant enough to warrant 3, 3.5, and sometimes 4 years of requirements, there isn't as much movement up and down in terms of total enrollment for those departments. Within elective areas and what I call true electives, where there is no state or local requirement connected to them, such as business and family and consumer science and world language, you do see a little bit more of a movement that at times can require a reduction or an increase of staffing in those areas. So if you think of the high school kind of as a complete model of a given amount of staff, that there are times when bits and pieces of that staff move from department to department simply to satisfy those needs of the students, or simply to satisfy the requests of the students in the registration process. So as you look at the list of proposed department reductions, those are based on I guess what I would say, describe kind of as a preliminary system of numbers that we get from our registration process. We've had our incoming 9th graders through our incoming 12th graders register, and the numbers reflect that these are the areas where reduction makes the most sense in terms of those student requests. There are some situations, and so that happens every year. In addition to that, then, we have to take into account the process that we went through with the secondary reduction process, and what that committee asked us to consider and I'll use Jeff's expression from the process, the toolkit. That committee kind of said that determined after the 4 meetings that they really weren't in a position of information to decide exactly what specific areas would be cut, but rather said, essentially kind of endorsed our role as building administrator to look at those recommendations, and then also look at the reality of what student enrollment is requesting, and also what we know through our experience as building principals to be kind of the lay of the land of how to best maintain programs, what the expectations of our community of our school community and the community at large is for our school system. and then pull all of that data into that decision-making process. So we don't come out of the secondary process with a list of, we come out with a toolkit of, consider these things. We don't come out with a mandate that says, make sure you cut this, make sure you cut this, make sure you keep this. There are some of those recommendations that are stronger than others, but within the confines of particularly when we're not making, they're painful enough, but not gigantic cuts, that how can we make those cuts in a way across the board that allow us to maintain as many programs as possible, because that was very much important. And it's always been important, I know, to the board, but also to the community and to this committee that we worked with. So those are kind of the processes that play in. Did you want to add anything to that kind of outline of the process before?
Sure. I think that you have a summary of the process that we went through, and I guess the part that I want to repeat again is the old saying of don't put the cart before the horse. Up until just a few minutes ago, we technically were still looking at about 4.5 FTE reduction at the secondary level, and as was explained earlier, that's on top of about 7 teachers that were gone that were never replaced in the last 5 years or so. So when we were making these decisions as a committee in February, and they were making their recommendations, there were a lot of unknowns. They knew that many things would be revealed to us and some twists and turns along the way, and they wanted to make sure that they weighed in on how they felt about how they could tolerate cuts in different areas, but also, leaving it to the building principals and not to micromanage or to go beyond their level of expertise in actually playing these things out as they come before us right now. The other thing that was really important was when we met for the 4th time. In fact, we had tried to get our meetings, all our work done within 3 meetings, but it was clear that the group wanted to come back a 4th time and just kind of soak it in and have questions answered. And it turned out to be a very worthwhile meeting that for 2 hours they basically just absorbed what they had recommended, and they came away with a consensus out of 24 people, which was really important, that they felt that they had done their job and kind of done it as a turnkey. So they knew that at the end, in February 24th or whenever our final meeting was, that they were done with their job, and the rest was in our hands to react to the activity that took place, and most of it didn't take place until just earlier tonight, so we'll go back to the high school.
So just very briefly, and I know that we have talked over the last couple of years about kind of how this process plays out each year, but for those of you that haven't experienced it firsthand, as you look at, for example, the business department as a point for possible department recommend reduction, that is based most significantly on enrollment numbers. And I mentioned the true electives, that if you look at world language, business and family and consumer science, those departments again fluctuate most frequently. So there is over time kind of an ebb and flow in those areas. Over the last couple of years, family and consumer science has experienced some reduction in staffing. This year, those numbers are up, and there are as many theories as to why those numbers move up and down as there are guesses, and it's really hard sometimes to pinpoint. Sometimes we'll look at a pattern, for example, in our industrial tech department when we moved to the Project Lead the Way pre-engineering courses. We saw that as a great opportunity to really evolve the program of industrial tech, and we saw some significant numbers the first year. Those backed off the second year, and now we're seeing some increase in the interest in those areas. So it really is sometimes a real hard pattern to pinpoint, but we do have the flexibility with the way that we do schedule our building and staff our building to move with those needs of the kids. We also, as you look at business and for example, the industrial tech piece, we see that flexibility piece also as a means of maintaining as many programs as possible. And Bubba Sullivan, who was in the reduction process at the secondary level, talked about, as we began to explore as a committee, how about if we cut this? How about if we cut that? And naming specific things, as Bubba that pointed out that, well, but if we can reduce here and save that class for those 20 kids to take auto mechanics, then I want to do that. And so I think that there has always been a rich interest in maintaining those programs, because we know that the more programs we have across the board, the more comprehensive our programming, the more kids we reach with things that they are very passionate about. And there is passion in auto mechanics, like there is passion in the English department, like there is passion in the business classes. So as we look at this menu of reductions, it's an opportunity for us, and I know it sounds strange to talk about reduction as an opportunity, but given that we have to reduce, to spread those across the board so that we can maintain those programs, and be quite honest with you, maintain as many of our staff as we can, because the people in our building are committed to these kids, and we really want to find ways to kind of share that discomfort across the board so that we can maintain as many programs and people as we possibly can.
Can we take questions on
Sure.
the high school piece of
Yes,
this
that would be
first?
fine.
Okay, anybody got questions on the high school part? Ella?
So if I'm understanding correctly, most of this that we're looking at for the resolution is based on students' registration for next year?
Correct.
And is this going to affect class sizes, the .2, .2, .2? Are we looking at?
Sure. One of the things, and I did fail to mention something that did come out of the secondary reduction committee. In the same way that we talked about maximizing student choice, and that was one of the things that they felt really strongly about, they also, we dabbled pretty heavily in the question of class minimums. We didn't come out with a declaration of, so make sure that a class has this many students before it'll run. But there are examples of that across this area. In fact, New Prague, if I'm quoting my source correctly, their board actually approved a class minimum that said that any class under 24, and that number is, I'm just picking out of the air, that's not what their declaration was. It's any number below this, those classes won't run. The committee wasn't interested in establishing that because they knew that there are certain scenarios where simply going by the number can have a much more detrimental effect than it might here. And the example I would use there would be in the world language department. We have a number in the German, in German 3, it is actually smaller than Chinese 1. In the case of German 3, we've committed that group to the belief that we're going to have 5 years of German for them. And we didn't guarantee that, but I think that there is something said for when we have 5 classes in the registration guide, they've moved through 1 and 2 to pull 3 out, and without acknowledgement that there's going to be a bit of a program decimation there, I think is a little ill-advised. The flip side to that is that in the Chinese program, if those of you that have been here since we moved to what I would call a rotationary method, where we're offering actually 3 years of Chinese within the confines of two courses. To take Chinese 1 and essentially kind of hold off with Chinese 1 for a year doesn't decimate the program, doesn't stop anyone in a progression that they've already begun. So there are pieces there that, and as you look at true pure numbers, the actual decision to reduce or to eliminate a class would be reversed. But simply because, if we go by numbers alone, so we have to factor in some of those other pieces. In the case of English and Science, we actually had some additional staffing that was contributed to those 2 departments once the original staffing conclusions were drawn. So it truly is a program reduction overall, but it's actually, if you were to revert back to 12 months ago, this point 2 didn't exist. It was added at a later point during the summer as we were able to move some staffing in there. So, and that would apply to both the science and the English piece as well.
So this is more general, maybe not just high school, but I want to thank you for sharing this toolkit and this process. It's really helpful to see. I'm so grateful for the people that serve on those committees and to the thought that went into this. One thing that this, I guess, points out to me is that we were missing going into this is any sort of kind of strategic vision that we could act on. And it looks like this committee started to try to take that on. And I guess I would just, any reflections you have on how this worked, and then weighing that with how we typically do things, which is based on kind of what students do year in and year to year.
Sure. The one piece I would say that with the committee in place, and I think this was, I would thank Jeff for kind of the workings of how the toolkit came into play. I think that we were both struggling after probably the second meeting with, well, how do we begin to quantify what the committee is grappling with, and also to kind of meld that with what we know we bring to the experience in terms of our experience with it over the last few years, as well as expertise in terms of how the building functions as a whole, what some community expectations are. So I think that committee opportunity allowed us to kind of share that. What you're describing is good to know here. I think they were feeling that same thing. There was a moment, probably midway through the third meeting, where I was trying to explain something, and I said, well, do you want to know what I think? And there was just kind of this audible, yes, that would be great. Not that what I think is so valuable, but I think that they were so steeped in kind of us kind of backing away. I think that they appreciated the opportunity to kind of hear our standpoint, and I think that we also move forward knowing that what's the framework generally. Granted, 24 is a small cross section of our community, but it is a cross section nevertheless. So we have a better sense of where are some of those priorities that we know that even though the board has established historically within my 5 years of history an interest in maximizing choice. That was reiterated by this committee. So I think there was an opportunity for us to hear some of those things we've known to be true or heard to be true from a larger group. And I think it also gives us kind of some sense of empowerment that we know what the community sees as the vision for the school moving forward, even with the budget cuts, and that we can use that knowledge now as well as in the coming years too, if in the unfortunate situation we have to do this process again.
Anybody else? I have a few questions about the toolkit at the high school.
Yeah.
I found it interesting that of 6 things there in the toolkit, whether they were supported or unsupported, that 4 of them dealt with world language and were actually inconsistent with respect to world language. You've got the item that says, deal with enrollment numbers,
right.
But we also say reduce this, don't reduce this, and it didn't even deal with the 4th language that we offer. Which seems potentially very inconsistent. If enrollment is the guiding principle, then why would you select certain languages for protection or elimination? And I understand what you're saying about if you don't offer Chinese 1, people can still take it the next year.
Sure.
But if you're starting it as a sophomore and you expect to have 3 years of the language because that's kind of the minimum to be prepared for college, not having the first year of the language really is, it's analogous to not having elementary orchestra. I think it's a way of saying we're phasing out this program. And so, this comes up kind of perennially, and obviously it was of great interest to this committee.
Sure.
And I'm just thinking that we need to have, rather than this piecemeal approach each year based on enrollment for that year, we need to have a more global look at our world language offerings and think real strategically for years to come what we're going to do. And communicate that to students before they register, so that when students go to register for a world language, they're assured that it's going to be there for X number of years, and they can register with that in mind.
Right.
So I'm really not. I'm uncomfortable supporting a reduction that would mean, to my mind, just as eliminating German 3 would really upset the expectations of students who have committed to that as their language. I would be reluctant to support not having the first year of a language unless we've made a commitment as a district that we're phasing that language out. That the kids are in it, can keep going, but so I don't know, where that goes. If we need to have some committee that looks at that and takes a several-year view of what we're really doing with our world language program. I know we talked about doing that a couple years ago and sort of resolved that situation, and then which was a very good resolution,
right.
I think, to have that rotating, the 2 offerings, but it gives kids 3 years of the language.
If I could step in here for
Yeah,
a second, and I think that the committee, if you were speaking in front of the committee, they would probably all be nodding their heads, because I think part of that inconsistency you talked about was a grappling with the idea of how do we best serve students, and with what number of languages do we do that? And it's interesting because I think the secondary question to that would be, If the answer is fewer than 4, given the economic situation, if the answer is fewer than 4, the secondary question, which becomes equally as difficult, is, so which ones? And I think we were far from any sort of consensus with that group of 24 to say, probably stopping short of obviously Spanish, which of course we had a commitment to in the elementary schools. I don't think there was really any sense that language 1, 2, or 3 was in any way more important or less important than the other in that committee. And I would probably, and if you see the PE comment, or excuse me, PE reduction there, one of the things the committee grappled with as well was the idea of offering PE credit for extracurricular activities. And there are a number of schools that have done that, but very few have done it on a quick decision, where they've said they've gathered a committee of 24 to talk about general budgetary reductions, and out of that came this recommendation, so schools moved forward with it. Because there are so many nuances, and I think that's kind of, I would draw a parallel to that, so many nuances to that decision that, one of the things Dr. Richardson and I talked about was this almost requires, a year of study, getting a group of teachers and community members together to say, okay, what's the framework? Because we had a number of coaches in that process who said, well, I wouldn't be comfortable granting a PE credit for some of the things that happen in my sport or in my activity. So, that really kind of gave us pause to say, well, this is something that perhaps we pursue, but it needs further investigation. So I guess I would say this was very parallel to that I can't argue with that suggestion that it is a bigger issue, because I think it does have community-wide ripple effects. So I would agree, absolutely.
Just as a historical note on that PE credit issue, we've looked at that real seriously in this district before you were here, and
Okay.
and rejected it at that time. Now the finances were quite a bit different when we were going through that process, but that has been kicked around, and we didn't do it for just that reason, because there was a thought that not all of those activities are really the same kind of things that one gets in a PE class. Given that we've done the retirement incentive plan, do you have a sense then, these, as I understand, are possibilities?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a sense of where you're going to go with this, loosely?
I would say loosely. I think that as I look at those, the industrial tech, the world language, without committing myself to too much in stone here, the science and the English, I think we're very comfortably able to reinstate those pieces, to restore those pieces. And with business and PE, I think there are some other nuances that don't make the PE piece as painful. We have increased physical education staffing over the last at least 2 years, if not 3, in small increments. So there is, again, almost an overage there. I wouldn't call it a 1-year overage because it's been increased over time. And then business is just we're in the process of looking at some business courses, and bless the hearts of business teachers who begin looking at some numbers in multiple courses with small enrollments and say, well, how can we meld these together into not a single course, but almost looking at it more like a seminar setting where students are able to do multiple courses all within the same class hour. So those pieces would be very difficult for me to project out what that would look like. But I can tell you that that percentage coming back of the retirement incentive does eliminate virtually all of our needed staff reductions. Gets us back to a point where we're still working with varied enrollment, but we're going to be very close to be able to offering what I call kind of the status quo of what we're offering this year in terms of staffing across the board, with perhaps a 10th adjustment here and there, as opposed to these 2s and 4s that you're looking at.
Anybody else? Anything on the high school piece of this? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, well, I believe you have kind of the summary of the middle school effort there, and I'd like to point out, as you look at the middle school toolkit, what was supported supported. And the same is true for the high school. This was the third meeting that we had, and our team had actually winnowed down all their ideas that they created the first day, the first meeting, down to this list. So you look and you wonder, well, were so many things supported and so few things not supported? Because between the second and the third session, they had basically tossed out the ideas that they couldn't live with. So it came down to really fine-tuning those ideas that made it through the initial screening process. And so there's a list of how they rank those on a scale of 1 to 5 and the average score, the median score for all those different things. And those were truly based on how strongly they felt they could support something like that. And in the process, Joel said many times to the group, what we're doing or what we're going to need to do is similar to what we do every year. It's just kind of under a microscope right now, and we have all these people giving us some input, but we still, we know where we can sometimes find efficiencies in the schedule, and we don't use them because we have the staffing to make it the best possible scenario. But those places exist, and so we had that list of those possible efficiencies. And then there were also the things that if we truly had to cut 4.5 positions, we couldn't just find efficiencies. We'd have to make real cuts somewhere, and not to cut a specific program, but just to find the areas that we could cut and make a difference. And so that's the toolkit there. And then it's also important to point out that when this committee wrapped up its final and fourth meeting, we hadn't even begun the registration process at the middle school. So one of the things we've learned is if we're going to live in this climate where a cut could be just around the corner, we're just going to accelerate all of our dates for registration. It may seem kind of strange to be registering for classes for the next year in January, but if we were put in this position again, we'd have some actual numbers to look at. It wouldn't be just working off of previous numbers and trends and things like that, because you do find that each class is its own, has its own individual personality when it comes to what they request. So what I tried to do is basically we made our possible program reductions had to be submitted a week ago, once again, before you took any of the action that you did today. And I wanted to make sure at the middle level that I had some of the ingredients that I would need to make whatever cuts survived here. As we can see earlier tonight, I won't need to accumulate the cuts that are presented there, but I still need to make some type of cut, and those suggested reductions would give me the flexibility I need to make them in the way that benefits most students. And so there is kind of a status report as to kind of where we were right now based on the early registrations. And so the program reductions that are put out there, obviously don't have to make all of them, probably will make very few of them, but they're in areas that either the registration information that is now available to us indicated that some of the structural changes that we made, because we had to change the registration documents if we were going to be able to make any cuts, some of those have had an impact in reducing some of the registrations in some of the areas, and some of them are more structural, foundational things. One of the questions that I asked this year that I haven't asked in Northfield before was I wanted to know, how efficient could I run a program? There was this very bleak forecast out there that this is this year, then there's next year, and then, it doesn't look real cheerful going down the line. It's like, what could we actually, how lean and mean could we be before we structurally had to change our school day or our school week or something like that? And so I went out and found the answers to those, and what I discovered in that process was I think there's a basic structure that works well if we had to go to that extreme, but also allows me kind of like a framework of, use the analogy of a Christmas tree. You have your basic tree, and then you decide, are you going to put on lights, are you going to put on ornaments, are you going to put a star on the top, or whatever somebody might do in that situation. And so I feel like I have that foundation of what's the minimum that it would take, and then to add things back as we go along here. And that's the process that basically the principals have been waiting for tonight to happen to find out what the budget is. This week we start placing staff, and then we go about making the master schedule all fit together. And we have those pieces now. And ultimately from the list of reductions, somewhere I'll find the savings that I'll have to actually make within that group. So I'll stop at that and just see if there is anything on there that specifically you'd like to know, how did it arrive on the list? And I could break that down for you. Otherwise, you probably don't want to hear any more about just the general nature of this tonight. Would rather just hear an answer to a question if you have one.
Anybody have questions for Jeff?
Well, I don't know if it's for Jeff recommendations that we went forward on, and that was a 1.1 FTE middle school classroom teacher reduction. And then we have the ones here that add up to be much more than 1.1. And I'm just having a hard time. I don't know where to start with my questions because
That's the cart before the horse thing.
So I think it's helping them to understand, Jeff, why you would have identified as possible cuts a number significantly larger than the reduction that was being proposed for tonight. And I think you can answer that. Go ahead and.
And the answer
take
is
a shot.
because that had to be submitted a week ago, and I did not know what the board was necessarily going to do. It looked, there was information out there that things were improving, but I guess as principals, we find it to be very disrespectful if we start making assumptions about what the board is going to do. And being these are possible program reductions, they're not actual program reductions. They need to be submitted a week ago, and I can pull back as many of them as possible as we go along. But whatever reduction I am required to make will come from that list because I can't touch it if I haven't put it on there as far as the program reduction goes. It could have been that I would have found just efficiencies that would have allowed us to stay away from programs. But as it turns out, as we look at the registration numbers, the numbers just fell into place where there really weren't efficiencies. And next year they could be, where these class breaks just fall magically into place. Just didn't happen this year. But on the other hand, there were no classes that were staring at, the number recommended by the committee was if you don't have 24, don't start something. And that wasn't the case. Everything that was a first year course had plenty of requests. It'd be nice if you have 24 sign up for a class, if you also have 48, so you have 2 sections of 24, but that didn't work out, so the efficiencies just didn't materialize. But the tricks are the same year after year. It's just a question of how the registrations go. And one thing that happens when you add choice for students, basically our 7th and 8th graders have a whole period of the day that they have choice over as opposed to us telling them what they needed to take. And that creates different things because you see a registration spike in places that you thought were kind of starting to tail off. All of a sudden they're given more choice, and you find out they really are popular. They're just being forced to make choices that they didn't have enough periods in the day. And you see some of our areas that were really of concern, some of our departments have extremely strong, stronger than ever requests now because they were given more choice over how to fill their day. So.
I think, or did you have something to follow up with there? I think that what I'm trying to understand, and I think this is sort of a follow-up to Ellen's question, is in the superintendent's recommendation, which we passed earlier, which I think I heard you say that's what you were working from. That would have been a reduction of 1.1 FTE middle school teachers. And so what you identify here in this resolution is 2.8 FTE. And am I understanding that you were looking at that 1.1 and saying, I may have to really reform a program in ways that I don't quite know how the lean mean picture, I may have to really, really structurally change a program. And so I need to identify all the ways I might need to make that real structural change. And that's how this FTE ended up being so high.
Yep, and actually there's 2 main areas where that came from. One is looking at that worst case scenario of cuts. We decided to break the ACE team up, which was 3 teachers working together as a team in 8th grade and had been going on for somewhere between 20 and 30 years, depending on who you ask. But
more than 30 years.
Okay, more than 30 years. And
we have an ACE graduate over here? Okay.
And not a criticism,
Okay.
not a criticism of the program, but because there was a group of teachers team teaching in an 8th grade structure that was not team, it became a real bottleneck for flexibility for kids. Kids were being forced to make choices just so they could fit ACE into their schedule.
So you're saying that's what you would have done if?
No, we had to change our registration documents because we had to put them out there. Is ACE together or isn't? And looking at the scenario that we had, we broke that up into an individual English class, an art elective, and basically the communications part of it we were going to put out there as an elective. And then we were advised by the English teachers that they could just fold it back into one class. And because of that, our art requests went down because they were all students were required to take all 3 components of ACE. Now they were given a choice, and they were reducing the amount of art that they chose to do. The other part is sixth grade. The other part is sixth grade. We're looking at what's the minimum in a worst case scenario we could operate our sixth grade under, and what was the most efficient schedule. And it looked like it would be a basically two-team situation where you do flexible scheduling within the two teams. In fact, some of the elements we talked about in the clustering here before are very similar to what we could do in the sixth grade. But we had always had an Explore 6 class for the past few years that was basically where do the kids go when their teachers, when their team teachers are having their prep, because we had their preps lined up. And it was always a flexible class. This year, they had keyboarding, they had art, they had Phi-Ed, and they had reading strategies or content area reading on top of their regular reading. Those are things that can be reorganized to make the most efficient schedule, to make the best structure possible. And I couldn't tell you right now which of those areas comes through in the end. We've surveyed our staff to find out what they feel most comfortable teaching, but we're looking at the scenario of our sixth grade teachers being elementary licensed teachers, and the potential exists in our cuts for some elementary teachers to actually not have a spot at the elementary level and would need to come to the sixth grade. And so we wanted to make maximum flexibility to react to whatever action was taken here at the district and come up with the strongest sixth grade program that we could. And then we figure out, do we have two teams of 6 teachers and the kids just rotate around? You don't need that Explorer class anymore. Or do you need 2 teams of 5 teachers, and somebody will have to come in and be a specialist, and which specialists are we going to use? And because that sounds very detailed, I'll give you just one specific example. Typically with our 300 cohort size in 6th grade, the way we had that Explorer class set up, the Phi-Ed numbers each period came to around 41, 42. That's too many 6th graders to have a quality Phi-Ed experience. But when we reduce it down to 21 or 22, then every class in the Explorer class, as they're all complement each other, was around 21 or 22, which is far less than what we're staffed for. So you're using a lot of staffing to make that happen, but you're providing a very quality experience. 21 6th graders in a Phi-Ed class is a high quality experience. 41 or 42 is not such a good thing. But we were using 1.2 FTE just for 6th grade Phi-Ed. So I can look at an example where when I get all the most critical pieces of the master schedule together, I can then look at it and say, all right, I can afford to go back to 1.2 FTE Phi-Ed, or I can look at a scenario where it's 0.6 Phi-Ed, and one of the 6th grade teachers would actually co-teach with the Phi-Ed teacher, so you'd have maybe 40 kids in a section, but you'd have 2 teachers, one of them being a Phi-Ed teacher, one of them being a 6th grade teacher. Why would that say? Because the 6th grade teacher is flexible and can be used wherever we need them, whereas the Phi-Ed teacher can only do the Phi-Ed. So those things are on there as possibilities, and over the next couple of weeks when we start putting the master schedule together, you'd see which of those don't come to fruition. Now, being we didn't know that we were going to restore all this for sure today, if we were to submit those items again, I could take a guess and say, well, let's just go with this. But I think right now that gives me the maximum flexibility over the next couple of weeks to come up with the best program that I can and make that reduction. And I don't know if I've helped explain it or if I just opened up new doors of questioning.
It sounds like you're contemplating some very large programmatic changes doing with ACE at the 8th grade level.
But we didn't contemplate that. We actually did that because in order for our students to register, they had to register for ACE as a complete block or as individual elements of the class.
And at the 6th grade level, we had one section of Amistades and then the other 2 sections. And now
Or the teams, yes.
The teams, yeah. And now you're contemplating going to 2 sections?
Would it be 2 teams?
2 teams.
Right.
One would be Amistades plus.
No, and actually what we do is the students that choose to take Spanish instruction would come from either team and take Spanish instruction. And I tell you, the biggest thing philosophically that we're looking at is initially when we looked at challenges we were having with growth at 6th grade, and the numbers, 3 being an odd number, you have some interesting, registration dynamics where we don't know until kids sign up for Amistades how many kids are continuing on with that. We can predict it, but we don't know until they sign up. We don't truly know how many ESL students we have until they come together, and they were grouped together to try to form one of those 3 legs of a tripod. I think due to the kind of the deep searching that it took to find out how can we survive if we are to make these big cuts, it becomes increasingly clear that as this district has evolved, we've come a long way in what we do for ESL instruction, and we've kind of reevaluated how we do the Spanish immersion instruction. And I think the best thing for our ESL students and for the staff that teaches them is if students are viewed as Northfield Middle School students first, then ESL, Amistades, whatever their other things that are specific to them after that. We've been looking at them out of necessity to try to provide the services as that's the priority, is you're an ESL student, so therefore we've got to do this. You're an Amistades student, we have to do this. And I think what we're looking at is the opportunity to evolve into a different way of doing that. If there are teachers who never have to work with special education students, who are teachers who never have to work with ESL students, they become somebody else's problem, or some a low skill level that somebody else needs to work with. And I think that this is the potential now to take that next step of making sure, for many of the reasons we talked about earlier today in the discussion about gifted, is we can do that a lot more efficiently with the 2. It also allows us to add back anything that we want to add back. So the structure, I think is just the foundation of it. It really isn't redefining anything that we do. The curriculum is essentially the same curriculum, but it's a more efficient model. It's also the opportunity that if we do have to make some type of cut, it'd be nice not to have to make the cuts and redesign things year after year after year. And I see this basic structure being something that I know could withstand, the most severe cuts that we could be looking at, but also allows us to take that framework and add things back. The 3 T's model was held together with, glue and paper clips and all kinds of interesting MacGyver tricks just to make it happen every year. And I don't think that this is the model structurally that benefits our students the most anymore as we stand right now. But also it doesn't tamper with the curriculum at all. Every standard, every course, and one way or another is going to be offered. It's just a question of, what name you slap on it or what period you go to it.
And how does that fit with the, just thinking about all the work that was done with the Compañeros program to revamp that program at the elementary level, understanding that there needed to be strengthening of the Amistades program to dovetail with this Compañeros program as those students with the improved literacy were going to be coming forward. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, and I'm careful of opening up too big of a discussion on it from my perspective. Yeah. We actually, when the final Spanish immersion program review was completed, we actually met, Dr. Richardson was involved in those meetings, and we came back and said, first thing that needs to happen at the middle school is high quality Spanish instruction. We were trying to find some way to have an immersion type program, but we weren't truly succeeding at anything. And so we said, the first thing we're going to do is make sure we have high quality Spanish instruction. And this year we actually offered it 3 sections simultaneously with 3 different teachers. And one of them being a bilingual teacher teaching our ESL students Spanish literacy, where the other 2 sections, so all those 3 were happening at the same time. That model would be almost identical as we're moving forward, although they might not be offered 3 courses simultaneously. It might be 3 courses spread out across the day, and the students go to the appropriate Spanish class. Then our longer term goal is, once we become effective at Spanish instruction, let's say it takes us 2 years, whatever the case may be, 3 years, then we begin looking at how we meet those students who are that first group in the true immersion process here that started last year, and we want to meet them when they get to 6th grade. If we didn't do anything different, they were going to come up under this different model and run into the same stuff that wasn't and it wasn't a bad program to offer, it just wasn't anywhere near what it could be. And it really wasn't accomplishing any specific thing, it was trying to do a bunch of things. And so that was the big emphasis last year, was let's make sure that they're getting high quality Spanish instruction when they walk into the door in 6th grade.
So your lean, mean vision here takes into account all of those program improvements that we've been working on. Okay.
Yeah, the only thing that would change is you're creating a more flexible, you're creating more permutations that you can put together to make the schedule work, whereas that three teams of 3 persons was always not quite fitting correctly. And what we find out is the really only value of having those 3-person teams was those teachers saw about 90 students. And that's something that is very valuable. You know, in this process, I've come up with a list of about 20 reasons why it would work better to have a 2-person team. And what we end up with is, if you're having, for example, a team of 6 teachers, and you really believe that, you know, dealing with 90 kids is the best situation, to use flexible block scheduling so that within that team, you are working with a smaller group of students. And I think, you know, they're keeping that old model really dug people in from exploring what are the flexible things that are available to them that they just weren't using, because there's, you know, this is the way we do it. And so I think this shuffles that up a little bit without actually changing the instruction that we provide. It does break up some bonds of people who have decided that, you know, this is where we are and this should be touched. And I think, as Joel said earlier, when something like a budget cut comes along and you're going to put the hours and hours that we put into this, we'd be foolish not to look at how we can do things better while we're spending all the time trying to figure out how to cut things, because sometimes you can make the two happen together and it seems like a paradox, but it's really not.
Yeah. No, it does. I mean, there's opportunity in these difficult decisions, no question. I've spent a lot of time on this. Anybody else have any questions they want to ask Julie?
Actually, I appreciate the time that you spent on it, Carrie, because I think it's really important, and it was confusing for me, and I thank you too also for clarifying, you know, the number of questions, but they absolutely need to do this. So again, on the vein of further clarification, the 1.0 arts, is that because of the elementary licensed teachers being able to teach any subject?
If we needed to become very flexible, we could do the art standards that are in place in 6th grade, and they wouldn't have to be a standalone art class. If there wasn't room in the schedule for a standalone art class, you'd embed it through, projects that teachers would say, well, I don't know how to do art, and I'll look around their room and say, this interdisciplinary project you did here, and this, those all meet those standards, you know. And because you're a 6th grade teacher, we could fold that back into there. So the 0.6 is basically what we use for Explorer, which might be added back in. If that proves to be the best model over the next couple of weeks, then it'll come back in looking just like that again. And if there isn't enough room, then something will basically get folded back into 6th grade, 6th grade curriculum. Looking at 6th grade and saying, every 51 minutes the bell rings and we must shift and do something and go somewhere else, is really not using the flexibility that we have. We've always had flexibility, and people haven't always been willing to use it, to do flexible blocks, to do interdisciplinary things. And you're finding, as you stop by the middle school, you're seeing that some people are starting to do that anyway. And so that might be a case. The other 0.4 possible reduction is we just have 0.4 less registrations for the art elective and the 8th grade class, because it wasn't required anymore. And once you take away requirements, you kind of leave it up to the kids and their families to decide what's most important for them, and they're picking other things, but they still have the exact same offerings that they had before. In fact, in some of these areas that are up for reduction, we've added electives over the years, so kids can even have more of it if they want to, but they're not getting their if you tell somebody there's 7 periods a day and we're going to assign you 6 of them, you've got conflicts with what people want to take. When you assign them just the minimums and provide all the other opportunities, then we can really customize the sections that we offer based on the registrations.
Anybody else have questions?
be real clear for the community and for myself and perhaps other board members. What's on this list is the maximum universe of cuts that might occur. We're not approving these cuts. We're approving the maximum universe. And in 2 weeks, you will come with what you are proposing to actually cut, which would be a subset of things.
Is that the date that you'd have it? Yeah, that we'd have that in 2 weeks. And what happens here today?
It's 2 weeks.
Yeah.
On the 25th, the next time the board meets, that'll be the time that there actually has to be a decision made on the actual reductions to happen. And again, I think framing back to what both Joel and Jeff have said, with the reinstatement of FTE to the secondary program, you will see ability to restore a number of these pieces so that what is left in terms of actual reduction is much smaller. And probably at that point, for the most part, the only reductions will tend to be reductions in that are caused because enrollments have shifted. And so where you may need to reduce one area, you may need to expand in other areas. And the idea being that this piece, as required by law, requires you to identify every place you might, in any way, shape, or form, end up making a reduction, not what actually will be reduced.
You know, and I guess if this happens to a smaller degree every year, is it would be very clean and clear if we were allowed to guess what you're going to do. Because we're not.
But not a good idea.
Yeah, not a good idea. Because we're forced to put that, possibilities out there and to have it acted on. And then we go back and, like you said, actually follow through on it now that we see action that has taken place. And then you get the clear picture. I wish we could fast forward to that and skip all the steps in between, but we don't really have that luxury, and it makes for a lot of static, I know.
Yeah, we all appreciate the constraints that you work under.
What would be best is if the legislature would tell us what our budget is, and then we could tell you.
That would be
that would be nice too, wouldn't it?
And I would reinforce what both Joel and Jeff have suggested too. The other piece that I think, given the uncertainty that seems to be facing us for multiple years into the future, is the restructuring of the scheduling process to push that earlier into the year, then gives both the middle school and high school an ability to really, with much more precision, say this is what kids are wanting to take. And so I think they will be able to get much more targeted in terms of this piece earlier on. I think this is difficult when has just not been the tradition. Typically, the tradition has been we're finishing up scheduling now, or finishing up all the registrations now, and we really don't get the schedule built till typically the end of the school year or into the first few weeks of summer. This is actually going to push all that back, which in some ways I think will end up making staff a lot happier because they will know exactly what they're going to be teaching and whatever earlier on because of the scheduling being pushed back. I think in the past we've always kind of held that off as long as possible with the fact that we know kids are still trying to decide what is I want to take next year, especially in terms of elective programs, and they're going to have to make those decisions early on.
And that's the silver lining, is that we already see that it would work a lot smoother if we had this accelerated, but we wouldn't have known last spring that we were looking at cuts like this. And I think the adjustment then is just for families and the students that, yeah, you're going to be thinking about this in January. You're going to be thinking about it over the winter break, what courses you're taking the next year. And you weren't used to that, but that's the new reality to be able to prevent kind of awkward moments like this. So.
Yeah. Okay, I'd ask for a motion in support of this resolution. And then I'm going to ask for a friendly amendment.
Thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Motion by Jeff, second? Second by Noel, and then I would ask for a friendly amendment to remove the elementary orchestra FTE from this resolution, because that's been restored in previous action tonight.
So I will offer a friendly amendment to remove the elementary orchestra 1.0 FTE from this resolution.
So amendment moved by Ellen, is there a second to that amendment? Second by
All those in favor of the amendment, removing the 1.0 FTE for elementary orchestra from this resolution, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, then the amendment carries. And I'd ask for a vote on the resolution as amended. And that needs to be roll call, right, Deanna? Yes.
Awesome.
Aye.
Maple.
Aye.
Iverson. Aye. Richard.
Aye.
Canal.
Aye.
Stratmore.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye. Thank you. Okay, we are on to the consent grouping, and board members, there are a couple of items in the table file added to the consent grouping, and Danita is now passing out the retirements that were contingent upon our approval of the early retirement incentive plan, so we'll be getting those. And I would ask if there's anything anybody would like to pull from the consent grouping. Is there a motion to approve the consent grouping, including those retirements? Moved by Noel. Including those retirements. Moved by Noel. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ann. Any discussion? Ellen?
I have two things. One, looking at this list, I thought, we need to thank and honor these teachers. I'm sure they were, really having to think about having to retire and, what a gift they are giving by timing and retirement in this way, and what a loss they're going to be for our district.
It's a tough list to look at.
And then the second thing, Hannah brought it up earlier, but the consent grouping has, I think, like $240,000 worth of proposals. And thank you, and Marty and Beth and Zach, I'm going to miss the names, but all the people involved in the UCFE, Harry Logan was involved, just tremendous. So thank you for.
If I may take this opportunity to really recognize the fact that with all of those grants, especially Torch and Plus and Primetime, that's this large collaboration of people. We couldn't do this without HCI, without the Key, without all these other players. And that's what makes our application so strong.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the consent grouping? We have that by Noel. We have a second by Ann, right? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Items for information, we have a enrollment report for April 1st. And it will be back on Monday, April 25th for another
Please
very
come back.
dense meeting, I think. Thanks to all our administrators, this has been, I know this was a hard meeting to field all these questions, and thanks to the board for thoughtful questions and good discussion. And I ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by John, is there a second? Second by Jeff, all those in favor say aye.